Hello, everybody. My name is James, and I'm joined by my co-host,
Nathan.
and we're back for either another episode of a Study in Cinema podcast or the first one. That'll be determined. We did a Study in Cinema podcast earlier this year. It was this year, right? We did.
Well, I think it was recorded like last year.
It was either late last year, early this year, because it was our top 2021 films, our top 10 films of 2021.
It might have been like January.
I think it might have been, because I remember it was cold outside. There was snow on the ground.
That's true.
I distinctly remember it because you had to come help me start my car, jump start the car, because the battery was froze over. And while you were here, we're like, hey, let's do a podcast.
That's true.
You know how all good podcasts start, with jumping a car. So
that's how they should start.
To be fair, that's how Vin Diesel would do it,
Yeah, and he's got family, so
exactly. And we are family,
That's true.
So we are brother-in-laws and podcaster-in-laws.
Yeah.
That'll be on a t-shirt, podcaster-in-law. So we're back for another episode of Study in Cinema, where we talk about movies, cinema, TV shows, just all things, our love for entertainment and art in the media form. And so what we've done is started a new thing, started a new thing or a new idea that we're going to run with for a little while, which is where we're going to take a famous director and down the line maybe even do like certain actors or certain genres and subgenres, and try to watch as many of the movies within that category of those parameters as we can within a 2-week time span, and then compile our top 5 list based off of the movies we watch. So, with somebody like Steven Spielberg, or with like some of these actors, like if you pick Nicolas Cage, dude's made so many movies, there's no way you're going to get through his entire filmography in 2 weeks, especially with life and jobs and kids. And so, however many movies we get around to, we'll make a top 5 based on those movies. So this isn't necessarily our top 5 movies of all of the filmography, but it's just our top 5 of the ones we got to see. And again, we're not set list. We watch whichever ones we're able to get access to, whichever ones we want to watch. So like the 5 or more that he watched may be different. I know they are different for this first one than the 5 I watched. We have some that are similar, but some of them are going to be different. And so again,
there will be a part 2 eventually.
Right, there will be a part 2 for this director and for some of the ones that have bigger filmography. Spielberg will definitely need. He'll need like a 3-parter.
Might need a 5-parter for that guy.
Yeah. So, but this week we're going to talk about, and Nathan graciously chose the director for this week for the first episode. I'm just going to call it the first episode, whatever.
It's the first episode,
which is
Filmography Friday.
Exactly, Filmography Friday. Is Martin Scorsese, or Marty, as his friends call him. Not claiming to be his friend, but I call him Martin.
We can wish.
Yeah. When I'm talking to my wife about it when we're watching, I'm like, oh yeah, Marty did this in this movie. I'm like, that's actually Marty's real life mom. And I sit there and I imagine that he's okay with it. He may not be, but I'll find out when
our hearts.
Right. I'll find out when he comes to the door and he's like, hey, he's accompanied by 2 guys in black suits. Asked me to take a ride with him. I got to sit in the back seat. Yeah.
I would totally go. Probably just take me to the movies.
Yeah. I'll be back there tense the whole time, and it's just like, you want popcorn? I'm like,
He'll just break out a beautiful 35mm print of Goodfellas, as he would say.
Oh, man. We can imagine. So, yeah, Scorsese. So, I will say I only got around to 5. I watched the 5th one today. But again, like I said, it's our first kind of easing into it. And as you said, you did pick a director who is notable for making long movies.
That was my fault. But what better director to start off with on a film podcast?
When you're talking about cinema,
ultimate cinephile.
If you're going to talk about a study in cinema, Scorsese is a cinematic powerhouse, I guess, Titan, legend,
icon, legend, all the words, all the superlatives.
So, I've got to look at my notes, my show notes. Again, it's called a study in cinema, not a study in podcast making. So, I got show notes here. So, with that being said, I do want to ask your personal opinion. What comes to your mind when you think of Scorsese films, either in style or like the movies or actors? What's the go-to thing that makes you think Scorsese?
Well, it's kind of a two-parter, because I had, before doing this little marathon, I had what I thought of when Scorsese was brought up. And now after watching, I only got around to 5 movies also. We struggled these past 2 weeks.
Yeah.
But now I have a not completely different, but it's a two-part answer.
Right.
The first part, I would have said, if you asked me before this, I'd have been like, well, that's easy. Gangsters and cuss words.
Right.
That's what I think of, or that's what I thought of.
Yeah.
Now, after watching all these, when you say Martin Scorsese, I would say that I think overall what I've learned is he does a lot of very flawed characters.
Yeah.
A lot of his characters are very immoral.
Yeah.
And he asks you to watch uncomfortably, usually, as they're doing and saying and things that you really wish they wouldn't.
Right.
And then there's also the gangsters and the cuss words. But I've also learned that he is a lot more provocative than I remember.
Same. Yeah. And again, I think that may have something to do with like which of his films, because I kind of did a mix this week with my top 5 of ones that I've seen before and ones that I hadn't seen before, and that may be the thing.
Yeah, mine's mostly new ones to me.
Right.
Actually, all of them.
3 of mine were new, and 2 of them were ones I'd seen before. But to be fair, one of the ones that I'd seen before that I picked is one that's relatively new, because I just had watched it for the first time last year.
Oh, that counts.
Even though I've had the DVD since high school, or right after high school. I've had the DVD, and literally,
backlog.
Man, I hadn't even taken the plastic off of it. Like, when I opened it last year to watch it for the first time, I still had the plastic on it. And here's how I can date it for you. Here's how you can know when I got this DVD, because, and I think I sent you a message about this, and I messaged my wife about it, and I said, man, the previews for this movie was the live-action Avatar: The Last Airbender and Iron Man 2. And so, but, I was like, man, I forgot, like, when trailers were made like this, and the old school. But we'll get to that maybe when we get to the actual list. But yeah, I agree. The gangster part, like, again, it's hard to think Scorsese without thinking of stuff like The Irishman and Goodfellas. And that was most of the stuff that I'd kind of like come to. But again, I didn't realize some of his other movies, like he's talking about watching Raging Bull or Taxi Driver or like Silence, or like you watch Wolf of Wall Street. Like, how many of his that honestly take place outside of kind of like a gangster world? And
yeah, we think of him as a gangster guy, but if you go in like total body of work, he's not done that many.
Right.
It's just the ones he has done are so good.
I think, and here's my problem, and this is where I think I made the mistake previously with thinking I associated Scorsese solely with gangsters, and here's why. Because I associated Scorsese with De Niro. And now De Niro has done
a ton.
Even more, because like for some reason, like I know De Niro did like Once Upon a Time in Brooklyn, and he did like Casino and some of these. That for some reason, because De Niro and Pesci was in these movies, I just assumed that they were Scorsese involved movies too.
Well, Casino is.
So he directed Casino, or did he produce? Okay, because for some reason I didn't see it on the list. But again, he had a pretty good filmography, so I probably either overlooked it or really something. But that's what I'm saying.
I do want to say, the biggest thing I learned after watching all these though is impeccable filmmaking. Like everything, the writing, the shots, but most importantly, I think the editing I don't know who his editor is, but the editing in his movies is insanely good.
I was gonna say my biggest takeaway that I learned from this too is his, speaking of like on the editing and filmmaking side, his sound, the score and like sound editor for these movies is incredible. And especially so like one of the movies I watched was Silence, which is about these Christian missionaries that go over to old feudal Japan to find another priest that went over there as a missionary, and they've lost contact with him, but they heard that this was during when they were, missionaries in Christianity was not exactly accepted very well over there, and you were either to apostatize, or which is to denounce the Lord in your faith, or be tortured and all this stuff. Not want to give too much spoilery away. I mean, obviously there'll be.
I didn't watch it.
Right, and like, so I'm not going to give like plot details. This is just like basic synopsis stuff. And now, like, so when we do our review, I did try with my notes to stay as spoiler free as possible, because again, for ones, not just people out there, but even for you, I know, like I said, me and you, certain ones we got to see and didn't see, but minor spoiler warning, and obviously in future podcasts there may be, especially for the movies that we did both watch, spoiler warning. So just spoiler warning in effect, but for Silence right now, I'm just giving a base synopsis to point out, because it's set in feudal Japan, in old school Japan, and there's some moments in there where there's just, like, the movie's called Silence, and I love they play where, like, there's no music, like, there's not even, like, a musical score, but you'll just hear, like, you can literally hear, like, the wind and the grass kind of blowing, or you'll hear like, crickets at night. And most movies, when you get to the credits, and Scorsese's really good about this, in his credits, I find myself sitting and just letting the movie play instead of cutting away, because even over the credits, he keeps the best, like, either sounds or scores or music. Every one of his movies had different, like, musical style and sound editing, but they were all so, like, just, again, it was one of those things that I was in awe of that. And then, like you said, obviously the film work, the editing, and when you're talking about people like De Niro and Joe Pesci and DiCaprio, like, he gets the best actors and gets the best performances out of the best actors.
Even Nicolas Cage,
which I've not seen that one. I hadn't even heard of that. Didn't even know it existed. So, speaking of, without further ado, let's dive into, and since this was your director choice, I will let you go first with your number 5. Starting with your number 5, and we'll work to our number 1.
Well, starting with number 5, ironically, since we were just talking about it, number 5 would be Bringing Out the Dead.
Okay.
The movie he did with Nick Cage.
And so I didn't get to watch this one, but I am curious kind of your thoughts and kind of opinions on the matter.
I really enjoyed it. I was curious as to how the pairing of Nick Cage and Scorsese was going to go. Because I'm like, I don't know, Nick Cage is like, I don't want to say he's a chameleon, because he's kind of a actor that does the same thing a lot of the time. But I was curious how their styles were going to match. And they matched pretty well, because Scorsese can get a little crazy too.
Yeah, that's one thing we learned.
If there's one thing I took out of this movie, besides the Nick Cage aspect, was that Martin Scorsese is good. He's really good at putting you in the mind of the main character.
Okay. Yeah.
So, like, because he's not like sleeping a whole lot during this movie, because he's what's the term? Paramedic.
Oh yeah.
And he works in an ambulance, and so he's kind of going a little nuts. And as he's going crazy, he's starting to see things, but the camera starts moving a little funny. Colors are like different colors are starting to go everywhere. There's this one scene in particular where the camera's just insane, and it starts going like sped up speed, and then it kind of feels like you're high on something.
Right.
Like you just feel like you're in a complete, drug rage, but
you're tripping with him, right in the trip.
Yeah, and it had a pretty. There were a couple of people I didn't expect to show up, like Ving Rhames, who did amazing.
Okay, yeah, I've not seen Ving Rhames in a minute.
overall, the movie was it was done really well. It's not your typical Scorsese movie by a long shot, at least what I would have attributed to him beforehand.
So
But
less gangsters and cursing.
yeah, well, the gangsters. With all these movies, there's quite a bit of cursing.
Yeah.
Especially the higher up the list we go, the worse it gets, I think.
I think so.
It's just indicative of what I like in movies. I just learned to kind of overlook it once it gets a little loaded down.
I mean, once you become a Tarantino fan, all that goes out the window.
Yeah, that's what I thought too. And then I watched all these Scorsese movies, and I was like, wow. Tarantino's kind of like Scorsese light.
Oh, I don't know about that. No, well, but to be fair, I didn't watch all the same movies as you did.
Yeah, once you get to the Wolf of Wall Street, you'll be agreed with
That's
me.
fair. That's fair. So my number 5, I could bring out them notes again. Which, for those of you who are listening to this, I should mention, this will be available on YouTube and on Spotify and other podcast platforms. So for those of you that are listening, audio version only, you're not even going to know that I'm looking at the show notes, but you do now because I'm telling you. But
exposing himself.
Since you're listening and you can't see it, I'll make sure to let everybody know whenever I look at my notes. I'll just make a point of it in the podcast. So my number 5 is Raging Bull. I liked it. Like I said, it's Scorsese and De Niro. It was a lot wilder than I kind of expected, honestly. Again, I went in expecting a traditional like boxing movie with Robert De Niro. I thought it was going to be like Rocky, but with Robert De Niro, and it started out that way. Honestly, like it kind of started that way, and then it kind of took some darker avenues and twists and turns that I didn't expect. Yeah. He got a little wild in that one, but the highlights that I did point out, that I did note, was getting to see a young Robert De Niro and Joe Pesci. And this is what was interesting about this movie that I specifically, again, is one of those things, like, after me and him talking movies, like, my wife is the next person I go to and talk about movies and stuff with, and I remember telling her it was wild because, again, spoiler warning, but for Raging Bull, and you have seen this one, there's a point where it does a couple time jumps, right? And so there's a point where it's like way into the future of their lives, and Joe Pesci and De Niro are in like old man makeup. Like they've had to use practical effects to age them up and make them look like old men. And if you've seen The Irishman, they had used digital effects to de-age them. Yeah. And I love that, like, that full circle of it. The whole time I'm watching, I'm like, man, they put an old man makeup on it. Because when you first start the movie, I'm like, wow, it's crazy seeing De Niro that young, and even Pesci that young. And then you see them like aging them with makeup, and I was like, it's kind of like the reverse of what he did in The Irishman. And so it's a nice, like, and again, not knocking that. I love The Irishman. That's the best use of digital effects I've seen. So, like I said, I didn't get around to rewatching The Irishman because that one's a really long one. But I do remember recently enough watching it that I do love it. But so yeah, I thought that was fun in Raging Bull, the aging them. De Niro's a powerhouse, both physically boxing and taking the hits, but also his acting. Shape. Even though he kind of goes to a darker place with it, he's just such a good actor. I mean, it's Robert De Niro for a reason. The score and cinematic shots are amazing. And then the next two, I don't know why I just closed that. The next two notes that I have kind of go hand in hand, which is, and it's a no-brainer kind of thing, but they're great in all of them, but Raging Bull really pushed the chemistry between Pesci and De Niro because they play brothers in that one. And just, they're always great together, and they're always got great chemistry together. But Raging Bull was just another, like, really good example of that. And that's what I was going to touch on, too. And this was another thing I was going to say with Scorsese that I didn't necessarily remember. But I always considered him kind of have a less happier ending kind of guy, that most of his endings were usually pretty bleak or pretty well cut off. Mm-hmm. But I was surprised by how many kind of had a happy ending. And Raging Bull kind of had a happy ending, I guess, because they reunite and they're kind of, he's like, oh, I'll call you tomorrow, and he's like, I'll call you tomorrow, and then it just they got,
Yeah.
And I'm like, it's a nice note to end on. So yeah, so number 5, Raging Bull.
Well, like leads right into my number 4, which is Raging Bull.
Okay, very good, very good. Well, now we get to hear your thoughts on it. Then that's good.
Yeah. Well, there's not too much different. All I can say is, I know it's a story about a different time, but every time I watch movies like this, I can't help but be so uncomfortable with the underage girl thing.
Oh yeah.
And it's not just like underage girl things. Like way back then, like women and stuff were treated a lot differently. Because I just watched Vertigo for the first time.
Yeah, yeah.
And I'm like, I appreciate the cinematic nature of it, but
yeah,
it's a little cringy.
That's another Tarantino thing you run into a lot too. When we get to Tarantino, that's something we run into a lot there.
Oh yeah.
Or even when we talk about Taxi Driver, it was very uncomfortable in Raging Bull, but to me, it's almost more uncomfortable in Taxi Driver because that one.
Yeah.
But we'll get to that in a minute. But yeah, I know what you mean there.
What I do want to say about Raging Bull is it has one of my favorite shots in film history when he's boxing Sugar Ray Robinson, and he's back up on the ropes and he's egging him on. He's like, "Come on, hit me!" And Sugar Ray's just standing there, and he does one of those nice dolly zooms. I love that shot, and it kind of gets lower too, so it makes Sugar Ray seem like more of a monster, and the lights are getting darker. And he's putting his hands down, he's getting calmer, and then he unloads on him, and it's like Psycho. It's like the shower scene in Psycho. Like it turns into a horror movie for a few seconds, and he's pounding on him. It's edited like kind of similar to. I love that whole sequence, but that shot, the dolly zoom of it, getting a little lower too. You just tell he's about to whoop some butt right then. That's
a nice reference. I like that. And yeah, I was going to say, that's one thing I noticed too, in that scene, because I remember you telling me, it was before you watched Taxi Driver before I did, and I remember you telling me to be on the lookout for that scene kind of thing, and when I was watching it, that's one thing I noticed was the whole movie, a lot of his films, that's another thing, that he has a lot of close quarters kind of shots. For the most part, you get a lot, because it's character-driven stories, a lot of his are very character-driven, so you're right up in. And so it was interesting, like I said, most of that movie, you're right up in the action, and then to see, like you said, that zoom out was a nice, like, change off. And, you know, that's another thing. Where's Marty's horror movie? I mean, well, Cape Fear, I know Cape Fear, he did that one. I didn't get to watch it this time around, but I've seen it, like, I've watched Cape Fear a lot. I usually watch it every year, because it's a remake of the original Cape Fear, but I like Scorsese's. I don't know that it's got a really big fan following or a lot of people like it, but
I've not seen it.
It's got De Niro and Nick Nolte and Jessica Lange. I mean, it's got a killer cast.
Sounds good.
And I think it's a lot of fun. It's a good psychological thriller. But, like, Scorsese has some good horror chops, because even in Taxi Driver, there is a scene that kind of put me in the mind of almost, like, horror movie-esque. But, again, we'll get to that one in a little bit.
I think he's afraid to do horror. Him and Tarantino both. They both will be good at it. And Tarantino has come out and said, like, he's a little worried that his style wouldn't translate. And I'm like, man, just go for it.
Right.
And Scorsese too, because
just go full blown with it. Look, Edgar Wright did it. He was kind of around it, and then he went for it with One Night in Soho. And that movie, I bought it the day it came out on Blu-ray, and it's amazing.
It doesn't have to be a slasher.
Right.
Scorsese would do a heck of a thriller.
Well, watch Cape Fear. Cape Fear is more of an old school, and it's more psychological thriller, but it's got the elements. Shutter Island, some people consider that a horror movie.
It's very thrilling.
It is very thrilling.
I'll consider that. Yeah.
So, my number 4 is Silence. I did go Silence, which I really enjoyed this. Again, one thing you and I also share a love for outside of cinema is Japan and Japanese inspiration and feudal Japan type stuff. Culture. That's the word I was looking for. Thank you. I'm like, there's a word for it. The Japanese culture. We have a deep respect and love for that. And so I was really excited. And I found it's about missionaries, and you got Liam Neeson and Andrew Garfield, who I think is an underrated actor. I thought he was an underrated actor before this. It only enforced my opinion how underrated he is, how amazing he is. Adam Driver's in it, who also is kind of underrated.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, and even I also put down. I'm bringing my notes out. Y'all know.
Mark it down.
It definitely made me think. It's very thought provoking. It really, again, I don't want to spoil this yet because you didn't get to watch it. But when you do, we have to talk about it because I have so many kind of like questions. Again, I'm not going to get into like too much of a religious thing on the podcast. I won't get into too much religion, and I steer on my own personal beliefs and opinions and our shared personal beliefs and opinions. But like I said, when you do watch it, I do want to talk about it because after watching it, one of the big dilemmas that was dividing two of the characters in it, I talked to my wife a little bit about it, and I think it's a very interesting conversation. Even if you're not religious, I think it's a very interesting conversation to have. Or depending on if you're an opposite religion of the one that they practice in this. And I think that's the point that Marty, because I looked it up, I was kind of curious. I was like, usually you don't see somebody making a religious-based movie, even if it's a dicey topic. Usually you don't see them bringing that up at all in a movie, unless there's some kind of like the actors or... Yeah, and that's what I found out about Marty is he's raised very Catholic, but even now he's kind of like, he's like, it's not like a full-blown Catholic, like devoted.
Yeah.
And that's where I think the movie does a good job of, like, even if you're not religious or even if you don't follow that religion, it still provokes, a conversation, I think. It still provides an avenue for that. Again, the beautiful score, the sound design, the cinematography, seeing these beautiful wide shots of Japan and the fields and the towns and stuff, just incredible. Andrew Garfield, dude, if you've not seen Hacksaw Ridge, you can't talk to me about Andrew Garfield because again, I don't know if it's a pun to the movie, but to say that I'll die on this hill, but that's his best movie, hands down. Right.
I won't spoil it. But...
Right, but that's to me
the story.
And that's not saying much because I'm a big Garfield fan, but that is his best movie, hands down. Like,
yeah, it's also Mel Gibson's best movie, if you ask me.
Yeah,
as a director.
Right. Fair enough.
He's a good director. I don't care what anybody says.
I agree. I will agree with. I'll
say what you want about the man. Sometimes about the actor, but you can't tell me that he can't direct.
Right, and I'll agree with that. But yeah, again, Garfield turns in an amazing, almost similar to Hacksaw Ridge performance here. And then Driver, Liam Neeson. Also, two of the Japanese actors that I really liked that was supporting cast in this. I've not seen them in anything. I looked up their filmography. Unfortunately, I've not seen them in anything. I might have to go look. But, and forgive me if I'm mispronouncing these names, but I wrote them down because I wanted to give respect where respect's due, but I don't mean any disrespect if I mispronounce it. But Yosuke Kubozuka. And Issei Ogata were two that I went away. One of them, well, I'm not gonna give spoil. I'm not gonna say. But
just look out for them.
Yeah. I'll tell you about it after you've seen it. I can point it out to you more. Maybe we'll do a podcast review more in detail. But that was my takeaways from Silence, which is number 4. So
I did not get to that one, but. What I did get to was my number 3, which is the one I watched last night. This is the last movie I got to.
Okay.
And that was The Aviator.
Nice.
So, I know the critiques of this movie are like, there's no story. What's the point? And I definitely understand that.
Yeah.
This movie is more of... It's like reading a biography. There's no story because it's someone's life.
It's like straightforward.
Yeah, instead of he's got to go do this before this happens and then this is the end result, it's more of this is what happened in this guy's life. Watch it. And I'm like, okay. I wanted to watch it because it's based on Howard Hughes, who is a very interesting character himself.
Yeah.
Basically the inspiration for Iron Man and all those, billionaires and...
Right.
I really enjoyed The Aviator. It's shot well, of course. I don't even think I need to say that, but I will for every one of these movies.
Same. That's the way I've been doing, yeah.
It's amazing. Leo, which I just realized I've watched a lot of Leo movies. I almost picked exclusively Scorsese's Leo movies, but DiCaprio, amazing as always. I don't know how he does it because I know it's DiCaprio acting in a movie, but after watching him for a few minutes, I'm like, that's Howard Hughes.
Right. Yeah.
And he does this with every movie.
Yeah.
That's a good actor. I'm not like, oh, look, it's Leo. I'm like, that's Howard Hughes. Like, he puts on an accent, which you can tell in the very back of his voice. So, like, that's Leonardo DiCaprio. But then at the same time, you're like, that's not him at all. So anyway,
when it's over, whenever you get done watching a Leo movie and then you realize, oh my gosh, that wasn't Howard Hughes, that was Leonardo DiCaprio, you just want to walk up to him and say, Mister, that was the best acting I have ever seen.
Yeah.
If you know, you know.
Tears.
Yeah. If you know, you know.
Yeah. It really, I learned a few things watching this. I didn't know he had a hand in producing the original Scarface movie.
I didn't either, man. See, I've not seen it, but I want to. Because, again, Scorsese
I've not
and
seen
Leo
the original
is a match made in heaven.
Scarface.
Really?
Yeah, because the original one's from like 1933.
Okay. See, I've not seen any of the Scarfaces either. I need to watch those.
Yeah, the good one I call it because I haven't seen the old one, so I guess I shouldn't say the good one. But
De Palma?
The Pacino one, De Palma did the one with Pacino. Yeah, that one's amazing. I've not seen the original, but I didn't know he had a hand in that.
Eventually.
Yes, we will.
I'm excited for that.
I pulled for that one.
Mission Impossible. Only the first one, but still.
I've only seen the first one, yeah.
Well, that's the Palma one, yeah.
What are the odds? Even the CG for this movie being, I think, 2004, it wasn't too bad.
I didn't know it was
on the level
recent.
of Marvel. I'm kidding.
Not that 2004 is recent anymore, but I did not know that it was that recent.
I think it's 2004, and I want to highlight the actress that played Miss Hepburn, but I don't remember her name. I've definitely seen her somewhere. Hepburn? I think it's Catherine, because I think they called her Katie in the movie.
Maybe I can Google it without getting scared.
He's totally not looking at his phone right now, for those who are listening.
Yeah, I'm totally not looking at IMDb.
But she did really good.
Hey, this is a movie podcast. If you can't reference IMDb, what are you doing?
Yeah, which, to be fair, the people on that website have much better reviews than Rotten Tomatoes. I would much rather look at the IMDb score first.
What am I doing? I clicked on one from 1985. I do not think that's the right one.
No, that is definitely not the right
one. There it is, 2004. Yeah, IMDb is one of those. I'll probably go to IMDb like 3 times a day, like looking stuff up. It's my go-to as a cinephile and a movie person. I do rely on IMDb a lot.
I go to Wikipedia for filmographies just because they put it in order of when it came out, and that helps so much.
That's fair. Cate Blanchett. Oh, I love Cate Blanchett.
Yes.
Yeah.
I can't believe I forgot her name. She did so well. And John C. Reilly.
I really got to watch it. I like John C. Reilly too. John C. Reilly's underrated. Everybody thinks of him as a comedy guy, but if you watch him in Chicago, then you know he's more than just a comedy guy.
He's not like a straight comedy guy in here, but he's got some funny moments because he's got a couple, freakouts. Because he plays the manager of Howard Hughes' finances. If you know anything about Howard Hughes, he's like a billionaire that does not exactly keep a locked safe with his money. He kind of spends it on everything.
Leo likes playing multi-billionaire type characters, don't he? He likes playing
There's
rich
another
guy.
one on this list later on.
Yeah, I know when you're talking about. And then I don't know if you've ever seen it. We'll get to it. I think Spielberg Week, one of the Spielberg Weeks, is Catch Me If You Can, where he plays. Also,
just added it to my list on something.
Based on a real life person. Again, he's doing a biography on Frank Abagnale.
He tried to win that Oscar for so long.
Yeah, he deserved an Oscar for so long. Again,
he deserved one for this movie, I thought.
He deserved one for Gilbert Grape.
That's true.
One of his first movies ever, and you're going to tell me that kid didn't deserve it for Gilbert Grape? Mm-hmm. Get out of here. And then Catch Me If You Can, and like I said, I take your word on Aviator because it sounds good. I need to watch it, but heck, even The Departed, which is another Scorsese film I didn't get to, but I wanted to. I would have given him a supporting actor Oscar for Django.
Yeah, I'm a little biased. I'd give him an Oscar for every movie he's done because he's just that good.
That's fair. That's fair.
But and I love The Revenant. Okay, it's great.
I do too. But
that's his first Oscar,
right?
The Revenant.
Well, like I told you, to me at this point, it's not even so long. It was like oh, Leo's not gotten an Oscar. I'm like, he should have multiple. Like you know,
Yeah.
again, Mister, that was the best acting.
Yeah, it was a crime though because The Aviator won many awards, and Best Lead Actor was not one of them. And I'm like, come on! It even won Best Original Screenplay, and people complain that there's no story.
Right.
Well, I think it's Best Adapted
But
Screenplay.
also,
I think
to
it's
be
adapted from
fair,
biography.
we're saying this, but also to be fair, and as a cinephile, I don't know if I'm committing a no-no here or not, but this is the Oscars we're talking about. Very rarely do my opinions on nominees and winners and stuff to the Oscars for movies of the year line up. But
it's a real slap in the
personal
face, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
Will Smith knows what I mean.
I'd argue Chris Rock knows more.
That's true.
Oh man, I was gonna I don't want to go too far down this rabbit hole. But
I like Will Smith. Just to preface this,
I do. I really like Will Smith and I like Chris Rock. But the thing is, to me, I need to watch Spiral, I guess is what the short end of it. Because I was like, what has Chris Rock done in movies anyways recently that he was at the Oscars? But he was
recently,
in that Spiral
I was
movie.
Gonna say he was in The Longest Yard, but that's not recent.
Well, right. And then, like, he's in Madagascar and, like, was it Grown Ups?
Yeah.
But that's just it. Most of his movies, to me, like, I love Chris Rock, but he's not somebody that, like, I think of as, like, a big name. But
He's okay in
I
Spiral.
do want to watch Spiral. I've heard mixed reviews on it, and I've only ever seen the first Saw movie.
Really?
Yeah. Speaking of Saw, though, I'll get to a fun fact about Saw and Scorsese. I'm going to connect it. I'm bringing it all back around.
Oh, you're going to connect it?
Yeah. So I'll just say it now.
Okay.
Tobin Bell, who you may or may not know as Saw, Jigsaw, he has a very, blink and you miss it cameo in Goodfellas.
Does he?
Yes. So, spoilers for Goodfellas, I guess. Even though it's like a real quick, it's a kind of coincidental scene. But there's a scene after they get out of prison the first time, like after De Niro and Ray Liotta. Forgive me, I couldn't remember Ray Liotta's name. Rest in peace. I can't believe I forgot Ray Liotta. After they get out of prison the first time, there's a scene where De Niro is going to the parole office. It actually says probation office or whatever, and his parole officer is Tobin Bell. But he's literally just credited as parole officer, and he calls De Niro's character's name. De Niro goes over, he shakes his hand, they go into an office, you never see him again. But I'm like, but there's your connection to Saw now. That's why I brought up the Saw movies and Chris Rock.
Oh, that's cool. I didn't know that.
I didn't either until I was looking it up. I've seen that movie, like I told my wife today, I've seen it probably 3 or 4 times, and today was her first time watching it with me, and because I'd seen his name in the cast list, and it said parole officer, but I was just like, I don't remember this. And then when I seen him, I was like, oh, look, there he is. Samuel Jackson's also in this movie, and I don't remember that either. There's a lot of, Scorsese, man. So where was we even at? We was on somebody's...
that was my number 3.
There's your number 3.
Yeah.
My number 3, speaking of De Niro, a young, iconic, and classic De Niro, is Taxi Driver. I had heard about this movie for so many years. It's one of those ones that's eluded me, and why, I don't know. I've always wanted to see it. It's always been just out of reach. It's always streaming. It's always on Netflix, and I just never got around to watching it.
So many movies to watch.
Right. Well, and the thing is like, I didn't know. I guess I really didn't know what the story was. The only thing I ever knew about Taxi Driver is the infamous scene where he's got like the mohawk and he's going, "You talking to me?" And he's got like the gun, and I'm like, just based on that one scene, I'm like, I don't know if this movie's for me. I'm like, this doesn't really seem like my type of De Niro movie, but because it's so infamous and iconic and everybody's talked about it, I'm like, I'm going to watch it. And again, like you said, there's some uncomfortable bits in it. But that being said, aside from that, I really enjoyed it. Like, again, it'd be up there. Like, if comparing to all of the Scorsese movies I've seen, it would probably be up in the top 5, top 3. It was a lot of fun, and it also took me by surprise because, like you was talking about, where he takes these characters that like do deplorable actions, but at the same time, in this one with Travis Bickle, I think is his name.
Yeah.
It's surprising that you he's one of those characters that you don't know whether to root for or not. Like,
Yeah.
he does terrible stuff, but at the same time he's doing it for good reasons, and like he's kind of like a vigilante type deal in this, which I didn't know. I thought that he was just like,
Yeah.
I thought the whole him shaving his head and like, before I had seen the movie, and that's my fault for judging a book on its cover, was that he was just like an actual psychopath killing people. And then you watch it and you realize, like, oh no, he's doing it because he thinks he's Good Samaritan cleaning up the streets and stuff. And the people that he goes on this rampage with at the end are really bad people, and he's doing it to help somebody. But he does it in such an unhinged way, like he was talking about earlier. The whole scene is played out very chaotic and unhinged. And honestly, it did remind me of a Tarantino movie, because the most of Taxi Driver is just this build-up. He keeps having these little moments where you're waiting for him to snap.
Yeah.
And then and then at the end, the last like 30 minutes or so, it just goes bonkers, and I'm like, what? And then it slows back down and dies back down, and there's even a time skip, or not time skip, but like at one point, like it's after what happens, and things just kind of go back to normal for him again on the happy ending note. It kind of had a happy ending in a way, because like, it's just his life goes back to normal, like after everything he did, and he just gets, and I'm like, I don't know. And he like, the girl that he rescues, he gets a letter from her parents, and they're like, oh, she's doing so much better now, you're welcome here anytime. And I'm like, okay. And but again, I don't know if it's because of that time period that was just considered normal.
Yeah, I don't know.
Or if that's just the fantasy element of it. The other things I wanted to point out about this one was, again, De Niro, powerhouse performance, young De Niro. Sybil Shepherd plays a main character in it, and she was one of the leads in Moonlighting, which is an old 80s TV show that I absolutely adore and have the first 3 seasons of, where her and Bruce Willis have a detective agency. And so it was fun getting to see her in like something I've never really seen her outside of Moonlighting, so that was fun. And then Jodie Foster was like a kid in this.
Yeah.
You go from like Silence of the Lambs and then seeing her as like a kid in this, which plays to some of those uncomfortable scenes. But despite the uncomfortable scenes, the scene with Jodie Foster and Robert De Niro in the diner when he meets her for like breakfast or whatever, and he's trying to convince her to, like leave town and stuff and save herself, like, is a really kind of heartwarming scene. It's a really sweet scene. Like, they have a good little chemistry together. Like, I really enjoyed that one. But yeah, and then, like you said, beautiful score, cinematic shots, just good to go.
Yeah, every time.
Now we're getting into our top 2. Now we're getting into the nitty-gritty.
Yeah, now we're really getting into it. Because speaking of chaotic,
yep.
My number 2 is The Wolf of Wall Street.
Okay.
Ooh. I remember after I watched this one, I texted you and I went, that movie was wild with a capital W.
Yeah, I remember.
I'm like, oh my gosh. Like, obviously there's, more, I guess you could say, crazy movies out there, more violent movies, more vulgar movies, but this movie, when I say wild, I mean, it was a wild, good time.
Yeah.
Like, it was crazy, but it was a good time. It kind of feeds into that side of everybody, because I believe everybody has that side of them, that part of them, that some days you just want to say, screw it all, I'm going to do what I want to do. And we can't do that because we're normal people. We're not in a movie. We have to go to our jobs.
Right.
But through this movie, we can watch Jordan Belfort do it, and it's exhilarating. But, I said I would say this with every movie, so it's shot very well.
Yeah.
Everything in this movie in particular is amazing. I feel like I said that earlier, but even more so in The Wolf of Wall Street. And it feels like with age, Scorsese's getting better. Like, not that his old stuff's bad, but when most guys get older, I'm not trying to put any of them down, so I'm not even going to mention them. I was going to, but when some of them get older, you know, the quality kind of dips. It's like
Yeah.
the craft and the art has kind of moved past them. It's kind of like when a fighter that stays around too long. With Scorsese, he's so into it that he's gonna be 80 this year, I believe it said. He is still innovating at 80 years old. He's still leading the
Irishman
charge
was what,
of
just
film.
2 or 3 years ago Irishman came out?
Yeah, I think it was 2019.
Yeah.
So I guess it's 3 years now, but time flies. Whew.
Yeah.
But he's still like leading the industry.
Right.
And it's been 40 years? Almost 50 years? Because what was Mean Streets? Like 76?
I think
something
so,
like that. I mean, powerhouse is the word for Scorsese, but Wolf of Wall Street, again, how Leo didn't get an Oscar for this one, I don't know. I'm not even gonna. He should have.
That's another one that's on my list. Is it on? It's on Amazon. I'll have to watch it soon.
It's on. Is it? I think it's Amazon.
Yeah, it was on my Amazon list. I think whenever I watched Silence was on Amazon, and they took it off, or they're taking it off this week or something.
Yeah, on the 31st at the end of the month, I think.
Yeah.
But I knew a little bit about Jordan Belfort going into this movie, so I was, kind of curious to see, because I had heard the movie was wild.
Yeah.
I'd heard about certain scenes. Then you see them and you're like, still more wild than I thought. But it also tells a very good story. Not, a straightforward like novel type story. It's another one of those like, here's his life, but Jordan Belfort's life was insane. It doesn't quite show the complete fall he had.
Yeah.
Like it gets to it, but now Jordan Belfort's back. He's doing stuff on like YouTube, and he's doing stuff hopefully the legal way this time around. But the cast in this movie was great. I mean, Jonah Hill, he's funny in every movie, but he's so funny in this movie.
He's a bit of an underrated actor in some movies. He can
he's not funny because he's a goofball. He's funny because in some scenes he's serious.
Yeah.
But like, the situation is ridiculous.
Right.
There's a scene with him and John Bernthal where it's a very serious situation, and those two just like they light it up. And Jonah Hill especially once they start doing those scenes where they're under the influence a little bit, maybe a lot of it, but
yeah,
his chemistry with anyone, it seems. Jonah Hill is a chameleon, but him and Leo in particular, it was off the charts. And Margot Robbie, of course, she does great.
Yeah.
I'm trying to think because I watched this one last week.
Yeah, so it's been a minute.
It has been a minute, but I don't know. I really enjoyed the movie. One that I probably won't watch again for a long time because not only was it wild and crazy, and there's a lot of nudity and uncomfortable scenes.
Yeah.
If unless that's your thing, then you're gonna love this movie. But also, it's 3 hours of that, which is not bittersweet, but it's kind of a pro and a con because it does not feel like it's 3 hours because it's so crazy.
Yeah.
But if you want a good time and you want to watch a movie that feeds that side of you, that just says screw the system, and you want to root for, because he starts off as an underdog. He wasn't born into riches. Yeah. You want to watch an underdog story that he gets to the top and it goes completely wrong. This is your kind of movie.
And you can double feature that with The Great Gatsby because it's he's an underdog story, goes from rags to riches, and then it goes completely wrong.
Yeah. Rags to riches to sharp downfall.
Going for a swim. Yeah, so I mean, that, speaking of like you was talking about feeding that inner nature and stuff, I will get back onto that with my number one pick because I had a little bit of, and that's the danger of cinema sometimes, is that's the thing about when you watch movies, is separating, like you was talking about. Obviously reality is different from the movie thing, and that's something you've got to keep in mind. But like you said, for that 3 hours, 2.5 hours, however long the movie is, it's fun to, like you said, sometimes it's fun to indulge in the movie and to escape into it a little bit. And I felt that way a little bit with the one I watched today. It takes. It's
not like I want to go out and do these things. I don't want to go out with all these prostitutes and do all these drugs.
Right.
But like watching him do all this exhilarating stuff, you kind of get to live through it a little bit, just the feeling of it without any of the bad stuff.
Right. Like, I've always, and this is getting more philosophical than probably, I'm not going to, like, dive deep into this. This is more of a, but then again, it's a study in cinema, so we've got to be, we've got to be a little bit philosophical here.
People say that movies are always, every movie is just about the human condition and what it means to be human. So
right.
It's part of it.
When I was in high school, and I remember this is something that stuck with me in my life that I think is important, and especially for anybody that is religious, I think it's kind of, it feeds into that a little bit too. You can tie it back to that. I remember reading, and now I'm going to get real old school, get real philosophical on you guys, in The Diary of Anne Frank. So if you've ever read The Diary of Anne Frank or know much about the whole Anne Frank situation.
If you ever went to school and had to read it.
Right. So, like, it was one of the ones that I didn't mind. There were some books in school that I just cliff noted or spark noted, whatever you want to call it, and took the test.
Watch any of them, except for one. There's one book that I read.
There was like a handful that I read. The only ones I was interested in, I read. I'm curious to know which one is the one that you read. I'm just going to ask, what's the one that you read, since you brought it up?
It's conventional because you know my style and taste. The people that, may or may not be listening, they don't know my taste yet. They stick around, they'll start to learn, but it was Tuesdays with Maury.
Interesting. Okay.
It was very good. Like,
okay.
Talk about a tearjerker. Oh, and Beowulf.
Beowulf's good. I remember Beowulf.
And Julius Caesar. Do those count? I'm not sure.
I don't know. That's a good question.
But like, straight book, Tuesdays with Maury was the only one.
So Beowulf, and even the other one that I remember reading that wasn't a straightforward book was The Crucible. Because
I don't count that because we listened to it on audiobook.
See, ours was like, it was in a textbook, but it was like in play form, or like it was like
like just
Julius the dialogue. Is. And so, sorry, I thought there was a spider on my camera, and I had to double check. It's that time of the year where we get spiders in here all the time, So yeah, I know I've got one on my shirt, so. Just one crawled off of me. But no, Diary of Anne Frank.
The Crucible.
The Crucible.
Which is a good movie, by the way.
It is a good movie. But Diary of Anne Frank, there's a line in it somewhere in the book. It's been a while. But there's a point in the book that she talks about the darkness within everybody. That basically everyone has it within them. Dark, and this kind of goes back as old as time. This is in tons of fables, in like mythology. Every man has two wolves or two bears inside of him. The one you feed is the one that grows, kind of thing. And like I said, even in religion standpoints, everyone is born into sin, and even when you're, become Christian and become baptized and stuff, you still have sin in you. Like, everyone has that inherent darkness within them, I feel like, and so that's something that I feel like. I don't know, it's weird. It's one of those things that I feel like it's, like we was talking about, the escapism of movies and cinema, or like when you're reading a book or playing a video game. Now, obviously, there's people that do have trouble differentiating between the two, and that's not good. Yeah. That's a bad thing. But for people that are able to, like, after a long week or a long day at work, watch these movies or play a game and relieve that stress, like you said, without having to take it out into the real world, I think it's an important thing. I think it's an important thing. As a cinephile and as a movie lover and as a, self-published indie author myself who writes different books and is in the middle of writing a crime detective thriller, I think these things are important for that reason. I think it comes back to that where it helps kind of to deal with that inner darkness, to sate it or satisfy it without having to. Again, not saying like, oh, if I don't watch a Scorsese movie this week, I'm going to go out and go postal. But you know what I mean.
Or if I watch a Scorsese movie, I'm going to go out and go postal.
Like, dang it. They took the movie off of Amazon. I'm going to go out and rob a store. Like, that's
like you watch Taxi Driver and you want to go shave your head and, plot to kill somebody too. That's
like
what
I'm not going that far with it, obviously. Like, I'm not condoning that or suggesting, but you know what I mean. Like, that's what I'm saying, like you was talking about. Like, I think it's an important like side fact. You know, if you want to get into the philosophy studying cinema, I think that's a part of it. I think that's a piece of it. There's my philosophical note. Back in high school, I volunteered school bus for a bunch of kids, and for whatever reason, they felt the need to call me Socrates because I don't know why. That was my nickname on the bus.
Socrates, though.
And so now you've got your philosophical Socrates lesson for the day. And now we can get to my number 2.
Yeah, you still haven't said what your number 2 is.
It's Shutter Island. Speaking of inner darkness, and I actually quoted this today. We have a group chat, Nathan and myself and our other family members, and I quoted this movie because it's, to me, again, bringing it back around. That quote is amazing. Is it better to die a good man or live and become a monster? I have to look up the actual quote now.
Basically the Batman quote, too.
Right. It's kind of like the better to see yourself become a villain. But it's... Where is it?
Oh, no. You guys blew up that chat today.
Hey, look, man. We talking about zombies. I don't know how we got from National Dog Day to zombie movies, but it happens.
Somebody said something about a zombie.
Oh, my brother did. He was bringing up Walking Dead, trying to ask if it was considered horror.
Of course he did. What kind of question is that?
I mean, I don't consider it a musical, although it could be. Imagine how interesting that would be.
Well...
I imagine it would be like the scene from Shaun of the Dead when they're outside the bar and they think that it's a drunk woman and they start doing the song, they do the da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da, and then they turn and he's like, "Arr!" That's a zombie musical. There you go. It's Walking Dead the musical.
Anybody needs to do a zombie musical. It's Edgar Wright.
That's right. That's right with the W.
It's Edgar Wright.
Yeah. Which would be worse, to live as a monster or die as a good man? And
I loved that.
I do too. It's again, it is similar to the Batman one. I kind of like the way that one's worded a little bit better, though. Like,
yeah, because we're all heroes and villains.
Right. We can't all wear a cape. Taxi Driver.
I could, but I'd probably looked at as a madman.
Right. Well, that's what I'm saying. That's what kind of disappointed me about Taxi Driver a little bit was kind of how it went to a good ending after all that. Like, he went and did all this vigilante stuff and like killed tons of people, and the cops show up, and he's like, you know, it's this real like dramatic scene, and I was like, they're showing you the dark side to going out and being a vigilante. But then he gets out of the hospital, he goes back to his job as a taxi driver. The parents are like, you saved our little girl and stuff, and I'm like, that's not how it would work in real life. They're not just going to be like, you killed a bunch of bad people at gun range and left blood trails all over the friggin' apartment building and the streets in broad daylight, waving a pistol around, and they're like, go back to your day job, sir, have a nice day. Like, that's not realistic.
Yeah, I mean, look at Frank Castle. He got thrown in prison for that.
Right. And we all know anything like that in real life. So that is one thing that a little bit in Taxi Driver, that's why I didn't expect it. I was like, that ending was a bit odd to me, but
should have went with the bad ending, Marty.
Yeah. But Shutter Island, eerie, character driven. That mystery, that suspense is very heavy laden on it. Great performances from not just like Leo, obviously, but you also got Sir Ben Kingsley, amazing actor. Mark Ruffalo does really good here. You know, everybody just knows him as the Hulk now, but he does a really good job in this. I mean, he does great
movies of all time.
Right.
Which we'll get into some other time.
Yeah.
Possibly allude to it later on.
Yeah, so like he does a good job in this. I think he played a great supporting actor. I even allude to his the scene that I really love with Ruffalo's character is there's a scene, and I know you watched this one this past week or so too. So the scene when they get caught out in the storm and they hide in like that mausoleum place, and then when he's like telling him, "Hey, I think something's going on here," and then Ruffalo's like, "But yo, you got me involved, and they're gonna come after us," and I'm just like, man, this is good. And then the doors blow open from the storm, and they're like, "Oh!" That's just, again, that to me is good. That's my chef's kiss scene from that movie. But yeah, that just I love detective stuff. As I said before, I'm currently writing a detective crime thriller, and that just feeds into that. I love the old school. They got the hats and the big jackets, trying to solve a mystery, and then there's a mystery within a mystery. And then the big
after you watch it, you gotta watch it again because
all the little things. And then the big twist and stuff is so good. It's very well done. It's a very intelligent movie.
It is.
And as we talked about before, some genuinely spooky stuff. It does get into a little bit of genuinely kind of like spooky vibes. So the old woman when he first gets to the island, and it's the infamous, most people when you see like people talk about Shutter Island, the old woman that's there and she does the like, that stuff's creepy. So old people are creepy. No offense.
If you don't think old people are creepy, go watch The Taking of Deborah Logan and tell me otherwise.
Not seen it, but now I don't want to.
Oh my gosh. The first half of that movie is some of the scariest stuff I've watched.
Goodness.
And it's nothing spooky. It's just a woman with dementia, but she does the scariest things.
Scary old people makes me think of It Chapter 2.
I go straight to The Visit, and I know it's not that good. I loved it.
Well, here's the thing. As a whole, I'm not a big fan of the movie, but the twist within the movie is creepy.
I should have seen it coming, but I didn't.
Right. Well, like, my problem is the concept, right? Is like, even afterwards, when you still think about being in that situation, how terrifying that would be. Yeah, exactly. So I'll give it the concept vote for sure. But I've got a feeling, based on what we know, process of elimination, speaking of detective work.
We're doing your best, Sherlock, deducing what my number one is.
Yeah. So, Chuck, why don't you go and tell me your number one, what it is?
Well, I think this movie doesn't get enough love. Obviously, it's Shutter Island. Yep. It was my number one. A lot of people would not agree with saying that is their favorite Scorsese movie. I don't know what to tell you. It's just my cup of tea, and I think that's one thing we can appreciate about movies is everyone has different opinions.
Yes.
And whether you're tea or coffee, it's my cup of my choice of drink.
Right.
Like, maybe I should say it is my choice of drink. I'm a coffee guy.
Right.
So
I'm a tea guy.
This was my cup of coffee. It was his cup of tea.
Exactly.
Well, apparently there was one that was more his cup of tea, but
herbal tea specifically. Even when you get into tea, you've got black, green, herbal. Drink a nice herbal tea. But yeah, no, I love this movie.
It was my cup of tea.
It's great, yeah.
It had that overall dark, creepy vibe, which I expected because I knew what kind of movie it was. And here's what I say about this movie. I'm shocked that I loved it so much because for years, ever since it's come out, I already knew what the twist was because my mother had spoiled this for me years ago. So, thanks, Mom.
Putting her on blast on the podcast.
Yeah, but how good this movie is that I got to the end, and I already knew what the twist was, sort of. I didn't get the whole story.
Right.
And it still, like, had a very heavy impact on me when you watch it unfold, and I already knew what was going to happen.
Yeah.
To an extent. I don't know if we want to get into the actual twist itself.
I don't either, because like I know we've put a spoiler alert
for anybody.
Right, like we've put a spoiler warning already up, but that one's such a big spoiler.
Yeah.
Like that's a big
well,
one.
What I'll say is I knew a fraction of the actual twist. The twist is not just this is what happened. What I was told was a part of it, but then there is another twist which feeds into that line he says.
Yes.
And I think that one might be more impactful because I thought we were going to wrap this movie up in a way that I was like, oh, I was still going to love it. Right. But then after that, I'm like, oh, man.
Yeah, that's the big one. Yeah.
Sherlock was just my thing. Like, I didn't expect to like it as much as I did. I went into it thinking, man, I would have loved this if I didn't know what the ending was. And then I watched it and I'm like, dang. I still love this, even though I knew what the ending was. Now I have to go back and watch it again to see it from that exact perspective.
Yeah.
And Leo, Mark Ruffalo, Sir Ben Kingsley, and not to mention, I want to put some respect on this man's name, but Jackie Earl Haley.
Yes.
His little role he had in this movie was so good, and this was the only one that my wife watched with me because she's not she likes movies, but she's not what I would call like a cinema person.
Right.
We'll bring Marty back into the conversation.
Yeah.
Since he had a big old spiel on what is cinema and what is not. But to put that aside, she doesn't like Marvel movies either, so I'll put that in there.
Yeah.
She's more of a TV show person.
Like I said, everybody has taste and opinions, you know.
And I respect it because as much as I did not think I was going to like, what's that show called? Gilmore Girls.
Oh, I'm not seeing it.
I don't know why I like it. Okay, it's good, but
no judgment here. I watch I watch a mix of everything. I listen to a mix of everything. I'm a mixed up person. When I went to work, I remember because I worked at like a call center data entry place, and I had my MP3 player, and I had some of the older people there. It's like, what are you listening to? And I was like, currently Frank Sinatra. Before that, Eminem. Before that, it was a Disney song, and they're like,
before that.
yeah, and they're like, wow, that's a pretty crazy mix. And they're like, you listen to Frank Sinatra? And I'm like, I listen to everything. Like,
Everybody should.
Right. I mean, so again, I think everyone is very entitled to different. I think it's what makes it.
Yeah. Well, that was like me at work. This past 2 weeks, I found this really cool radio station on iHeartRadio. It's called Rewound Radio.
Okay.
And it plays like everything from like the 50s to the 80s.
Jeez,
and I've just been blasting that stuff through the truck at work, and I'm like,
I'm gonna have to look it up.
I love it. But I don't know where I was going with the saying my wife watched this movie with me bit. But Shutter Island, yeah. I don't know what I can say. Like, if you know me, my favorite genre is horror.
Mm-hmm.
So anything that does with horror, you know, automatically, I love it.
Yeah.
But as I say, it's my favorite genre. It's kind of misleading because it's more of a feeling that I get from horror movies that makes it my favorite. I get the same thing from psychological thrillers, which is what I would call this.
Yes, same.
It's very psychological.
Well,
so in a way, psychological thriller might be my favorite, but it's that feeling. I get that feeling with this movie, and I think that's what I loved about it the most.
Yeah.
And Jackie Earle Haley, by the way.
Yes.
That's what I was gonna say. When she was watching it with me, I'm like, okay, listen to his voice, and I'm like, does it sound familiar? And she's like, no, and I'm like, this is the guy that played Freddy in the Nightmare on Elm Street reboot that was universally hated, and I'm like, she's like, I can hear it now in a little bit in the deeper tones of his voice.
Mm-hmm.
And all I just wanted to say about that was, can we cut the guy some slack? His performance was great. The script was just crap.
That's what I was gonna say.
He did what he could with what he had, and what he did, I thought, was amazing. I would love to have him back if he wanted to do another one, but I don't know. The horror fan base can be kind of intimidating.
Yeah, that's what I was gonna say. Like, I didn't mind him as Freddy. Like, that was, but like you said, my issue was more with the writing aspect, just the pacing and the way it was done. But yeah, but I like Jackie Earle Haley. I liked him, and see, again, I'm not a real big. What's the big DC Watchmen? I'm not like a super big Watchmen fan, but again, Jackie Earle Haley did amazing in it, and he did great in this.
His little role, he's only in it for a few minutes, but he's so convincing. He puts everything into those like 5 minutes he's in.
Right. Yeah, it does so well. It's such a good movie, like you said. I mean, if it wasn't for my number one, then Shutter Island would be my number one, honestly, and that's probably out of all Scorsese movies. Shutter Island would be my number 2 out of all Scorsese movies, but my number 1, which my wife also watched with me, the only one she watched with me was my number 1, which is Goodfellas. You know, for as far back as I can remember, I always wanted to be a gangster. That line alone, listen, and this is another thing, as you get to know us, I mean, and this is what I was talking about, like, agreeing with you on that whole inherent, like, escaping into kind of the wildness and maybe the less morale things in movies.
Yeah.
Like, whenever he says that line, and it's like at the very beginning of the movie, and it's like literally he opens the trunk and there's a body in there. It's the opening shot of the movie, and you just see young Ray Liotta stand there with the headlights and stuff. And he says that line, and in that moment, you're like, yeah, me too. It's like,
Yeah,
it's like I want to be a gangster too.
I wanted to be a gangster in my life. The way he says it, you're just like, yeah.
And then like there's a scene where they're at like this restaurant, fancy restaurant, and he makes this statement where he's like, see, to us, we had everything. And he goes, guys that had a regular 9 to 10 job that struggle with their bills, they were suckers. And I'm like, he's talking about me right now. I'm like, and then in that moment, I'm like, I am a sucker. And he's like, we just take whatever we want. I'm like, I'm going to be that. I'm like, you know, when you're watching it, you feel like, man, must be nice. Which, granted, the movie does a good job of kind of showing you.
Yeah.
It does a good job of teaching you, like, hey, this life is not all glam and glamour and greatness.
Yeah.
But in a way, it also kind of doesn't. Like, it kind of goes back on it a little bit. The way it ends is very interesting, and he even says a line at one point, which again, I don't want to spoil too much for that one either, because it's, even though again it is such an iconic movie, it's again, when you're talking Scorsese, if somebody says to me Martin Scorsese, I'm going to say Goodfellas. That's just, for the longest time, that's the movie that he is so synonymously known for. And like I told my wife, I had seen it. I don't know why. I got apologetic. Sometimes I'll do that a lot whenever I'll hype up a movie that I've not seen in a long time to her, and then she'll be interested and want to watch it, and then all of a sudden my head is like, what if she doesn't like it? And then I'll be like, I've not seen this movie in a long time, so it may suck now. And I started to do that with Goodfellas, because I was like, now to be fair, I've seen it like 4 or 5 times, but that was back in like high school days. I'm like, it may not hold up as well. I apologize for apologizing, because that movie is still amazing. Like, even within the first like 5-10 minutes, she's like, I'm hooked. She's like, I'm so invested in this movie right now, and we wasn't even like 10 minutes in. I was like, yeah, me too, and I've seen it 3 times already.
Well, that trunk shot's amazing. Like, he shuts the trunk and then it zooms in on him, and I'm like, yeah,
you know what you're in for. You literally, it opens with them riding. There's a body in the trunk. They stab it and shoot it, and then he closes the trunk, and it does the zoom in on his face, and he says that line, and you're like, okay, buckled in now. This is going to be a movie. And it doesn't disappoint. It doesn't stop from there. And you have so many iconic lines, like the gangster line, the am I funny when I amuse you, when am I a clown? Joe Pesci is unhinged in this movie. I forgot how wild he is. However unhinged I said De Niro was before, Joe Pesci triples it in this movie.
Pesci, every time I see him, reminds me how much I miss him not doing more movies.
Right, yeah, I know, right? I thought the same thing.
He's so good.
Because, again, in it, you're reminded how good him and De Niro's chemistry is, how good they are together, and then you realize it's been so long. You know, Irishman was like that big reunion, and you're just like, man.
And he didn't miss a step.
No, he didn't.
He's been retired for how long?
I don't know. What's the last thing I remember seeing Pesci in? It was either Home Alone or Cousin Vinny.
I feel like he probably did like a couple small roles, but he didn't do anything big for a long time.
No.
He came back for Robert De Niro and Scorsese and didn't miss a beat.
Speaking of Scorsese, this is another thing I realized watching Goodfellas. The man knows food. He can make me hungry so easily with his movies. I remember when The Irishman came out, it was funny because it came out right around Thanksgiving, and I think me and my wife watched it on Thanksgiving week. And there's like a scene in there where they're eating chili dogs and talking about chili dogs, and then there's another scene where they're eating ice cream, and there's even the scene that gets me so much is there's a scene in The Irishman, spoilers for The Irishman about food, where Joe Pesci is eating a box of cereal. It's like one of those little personal, like, mini brand, and he pours it in a bowl, and he's eating cereal. And I'm like, I have never wanted cereal so badly. All the cereal commercials in my life have never made me want to go out and buy cereal more than Joe Pesci just eating it at a little diner. And I'm like...
It's like when you're watching... what movie was it? When we watched Spirited Away?
Right.
I'm like, I don't even know what this food is, but it makes me want to eat it.
That's what I told my wife. I said, Scorsese is like the Miyazaki when it comes to food on film. He's like that for live action, because then I'm watching Goodfellas, and again, they're eating hot dogs at one scene. They're having like a cookout, And then there's a scene where they're having like this big family like dinner thing, and they've got like lasagna and like meat. There's a scene where they're in prison and they're making like spaghetti sauce, and Paul Sorvino, who also died recently, him and Ray Liotta both died this year. It's kind of sad. Two Goodfellas big stars died this year.
Goodfellas.
Back to back. Ray died in May, not to rhyme, and Paul Sorvino died in July, which was crazy. But there's a scene when they're in prison and Sorvino is slicing garlic, and they make the comment that he does it with a razor blade, and it gets so thin that the garlic melts into the butter when you fry it into a pan. And I'm sitting there and just like my mouth is just watering right now, and I'm like, put me in that prison cell, man. Like,
oh, really?
I love Italian food as it is, and you're talking about melting garlic in a pan because it's sliced with a razor blade. I'm like, come on.
No.
Yeah, so it's so good. Scorsese's mom and dad both play roles in that movie flawlessly, might I add. In the prison scene when they're cooking, his dad is the guy making the spaghetti sauce. There's a comment about he puts too many onions in his spaghetti sauce. And then his mom, Scorsese's mom, plays Joe Pesci's mom in the movie, and she's hilarious. Like, she's almost just as funny as Pesci is in that movie. Has a brilliant scene in that movie. But the whole movie, like I said, the sound, the score, it has that old school mafia style soundtrack, and we're big mafia fans here, big mobsters, especially the mafia video games. There's a scene in this at the beginning that, to me, feels almost directly out of Mafia 2. Reminds me of the scene when or the level in the game, or the scene in the movie when they're selling cigarettes, like on the streets and stuff, like trying to, and then they like give some cigarettes to the cops to bribe them off.
Yeah. And
Mafia 2 is in my top 3 favorite video games of all time, so this movie just coincides with that so beautifully. And what a great, with Ray Liotta passing, I'm a big Ray Liotta fan. I've seen a lot of Ray Liotta movies. After he passed, I was looking at it, and I've seen a lot of his films. But this one again is just it's his piece de resistance. It's just so good. I can't say enough good thing. I could spend forever on it, but yeah, my number one's Goodfellas.
I didn't get time to rewatch it, so before people crucify me.
Yeah, we only ranked based on the ones we watched. So it's just like with me not getting to Wolf of Wall Street and The Aviator.
I'll watch the rest of them.
Right. But before we close out, we will go ahead and announce. I think we've figured out our next week's director.
Yeah, unless you switched it up on me.
No, I had to check my I'm checking my notes to see who next week's director is. Which will be
it is.
2 weeks from now. I'm going to edit this hopefully tomorrow, so I don't know. It'll either be up Saturday or Sunday. The podcast will be up on YouTube and then wherever your podcasts, wherever, Spotify, that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
So either Saturday or Sunday, and then 2 weeks from that day, we're recording this on a Friday, so 2 weeks from this Friday, we're going to do our next podcast, which will be the films of director David Fincher. We're talking Seven, Zodiac, Fight Club, some big heavy hitters, no pun intended, or intended, however you like it.
We don't talk about that.
We're not going to talk about it. So if you liked this, be sure to, I guess if you're on YouTube, like, comment, subscribe. Let us know your favorite Scorsese movies. And if you're on Spotify, I think you can comment on there and like, I don't know, I'm sure you can somehow. Drop us a note, let us know. Hopefully we'll get some more stuff going soon, get more social media kind of presence, and so you guys can definitely interact more. But for now, be sure to come back in 2 weeks and we'll find out what's in the box. See you guys next time.
See ya.